Hi, Sebastian. It's April and a little late, so some of the news may be what some people have talked about, but I think you have insights that most people maybe would be interested in hearing. So let's
Good to see you,
get
Layla.
into it again. Yes. Number one, we have Canada. What have they done?
And in Canada, they had kind of the flagship carbon removal day event, and just before we could see a letter written by Prime Minister Mark Carney about turning Canada into kind of a global leader, which is, as far as I know, the highest level endorsement of carbon removal I've seen. And then at the event itself, 100 million from various private sector players were committed. A blueprint report about essentially how to create a gigaton of removals in Canada was published. There was just a lot of momentum. And again, we've been talking about this since Trump took office, that kind of Canada is becoming a magnet for also American companies to keep doing the work that they're doing. And yeah, a lot of good stuff in the last month came out of Canada. So let's hope that they can keep building on, especially the political momentum that they've also had.
Yeah.
And yeah, got high hopes for what's happening there.
Well, yeah, that's a bright spot in North America for CDR for sure. Although like we've talked before, there are some states that are pushing for it, especially with biochar. So that's good in America. But in any case, number two, the EU ETS, everyone's favorite topic.
Yeah, I mean, this is really heating up because we're going to have a proposal from the Commission about of the ETS in July. Carbon removals is one part of it, but there's much bigger fish to fry when it comes to this reform. It doesn't get touched often. So everyone wants to have their say right now. It's also about what should happen with the maritime sector, what should happen with aviation, what should happen with the cap. There's a lot of different things that are being discussed. What I have highlighted in the last months is, on the one hand, kind of the people who are criticizing it, the people who are defending it. One thing that I found really interesting is I found this policy in Denmark, and what they've done, they've actually put a carbon tax on top of the ETS tax, which is kind of pretty crazy, as so often Denmark is kind of going in the exact opposite direction of other countries. But their rationale is that by doing this, they have more predictability about the carbon price, but also the revenues they get from it. Because the ETS is generating a lot of revenues for countries. And when it's being attacked, when the prices fluctuate a lot, it means less money for decarbonization projects. And so Denmark essentially has set up their own carbon tax on top of the ETS that gives them predictable revenue for decarbonization. But it's pretty wild because even the ETS itself at kind of 70, 80 euros a ton is heavily being criticized heavily. And they're saying, well, we can put 15 to 50 euros on top of that.
Who's pushing back the most in Europe?
Uh, I mean, the industries that are most affected, like for example, the chemical industry is lobbying very heavily right now against it. There's a lot of sectors that are basically
Mhm.
they are struggling with the current status quo. They have a very short-term vision of how to manage their profits, I guess, for the next quarter or two.
Mhm.
And as such, they're advocating for lower carbon prices.
Right, but doesn't CDR and carbon capture and utilization help the chemical industry reduce costs in
How?
the long run? Doesn't
Yeah,
it
but
help change their feedstock and make it more reliant? I guess that's a future looking.
this is the problem, right? Like if you assume that we're going to live in a future where there will be a cost of carbon and the cost of carbon will probably be higher than what it is today, then yes. If you think
Mhm.
you can just get away with not paying for carbon or paying very little, then CDI is out of question and loses
Yeah,
the
got it.
significance.
That
And
makes
then
sense.
they operate, it's very short terminism. And if
Sure.
you operate like that, CDR doesn't really play a role.
Right. Interesting. All right, moving forward, in the same vein, number three, compliance alone won't save CDR. So,
Yeah, again, I thought this was an
yeah.
interesting analysis. I covered a little bit of it last time, but this is a different angle. I've basically been looking at the main emission trading systems and carbon pricing systems globally. Last time I spoke about how it's not just about eligibility for CDR, um, But this time, but last time I said eligibility doesn't only matter, it's really about price. If the price is not high enough, it doesn't really matter if it's eligible because nobody's going to buy CDR. This time I looked more at why size doesn't really matter. Because if you take, for example, China, it's by far the biggest carbon pricing system in the world. It covers 8 gigatons or 16% of global emissions. It's huge. It's 8 times bigger than the European one, which is already huge.
Right.
But it doesn't really matter because it's a very nascent framework. And as such, it doesn't really have any teeth yet, for example. And so, what I'm trying to convey with this analysis is you need to look at size, but more than that, you need to look at maturity. You need to look at how long has this been operating? Is there already a cost in place, or is it all free allowances, for example? And then you can judge what the potential is. But size alone doesn't tell you much.
And also where the market is, because I would assume that a lot of what China's doing is China centric, right? Whereas a lot of what Europe does, you end up funding African projects, right? And other, so it's more of a global, um,
Not really. I mean,
potentially.
all these
Yeah.
systems are domestic, all of them.
Yeah.
Europe is setting up the carbon border adjustment mechanism to kind of go
Right.
along with the ETS, which is having kind of this ripple effect where other countries are
Hmm.
incentivized to also set up their own carbon pricing system.
Right.
But in general, they're always kind of domestic efforts, both in
Right.
Europe and
Domestic,
abroad.
but where are they sourcing all that though? Anyway, the credits. That's what I'm saying.
But this is what I mean. In
Yeah.
most systems, you're not allowed to use credits at all. In
Outside.
the
Okay.
ones
Got it. Okay.
where you are allowed to use credits, they tend to be domestic credits. There's some exceptions like Japan. Japan allows, for
Hmm.
example, already non-domestic credits. But in most cases, policymakers are not interested in money leaving the country. So
Right.
it's usually domestic only.
Got it. Right. I somehow thought, I thought we had talked in a previous discussion about Europe thinking about, anyway,
But
maybe
not
not.
in its ETS. Europe is looking at procuring huge
Right.
amounts of international credits to
Right.
achieve its objective. It hasn't yet
Right.
said what it will use those credits for exactly, like in the emission trading
Got it.
system,
Okay.
to decarbonize other sectors.
Okay.
But you're right, Europe will get a lot of international credits, but not within its emission trading system. So far, that's a red
Got it.
line.
All right. These are the fine points that someone like myself are very happy to learn. And I'm sure some people listening will be happy to learn about that. All right. Ciao Italia, something number 4, Ciao Italia. We have something happening in Italy.
Yeah, just it's actually just happened yesterday and last week, but we now have an association for carbon removal in Italy, which is very exciting. It's the Rete Italiana Rimozione Carbonio, which is basically the equivalent of some of the associations we've already seen in other European countries emerge, like Germany and Italy. I'm personally, as an Italian living in Italy, obviously very excited for this. I do also recognize that Italy is still pretty far behind when it comes to both the startup ecosystem, the ease of doing business, I can tell from my own experience, but also just knowledge of carbon removal. But at least now we have a platform that brings together the stakeholders and kind of starts the process. And Carbon Gap as well released and did a report on the potential and the policy recommendations, which appeared. We were recording on the 21st of April. It appeared yesterday. I'm sure we're going to cover it next time in more depth. But so yeah, it's good news that at least the ball is starting to move in Italy.
Hmm. Hmm. And there's a lot of people from Italy listening to this podcast. I think we're
Hopefully.
one of the leading countries. So it's true. All right. And Spain, Europe's sleeping giant. That is true. I know a lot of people in Spain that are interested in CDR.
They should be. Again, Carbon Gap did a readiness assessment for Spain, and their takeaway was that Spain is the country in all of Europe with the most potential. They were very early on for many reasons. They have a lot of biomass, they have huge amounts of agriculture, they have geological storage, but also crucially, they've invested heavily and early in renewables. And that means that they have some of the cleanest and cheapest energy in Europe.
Hmm.
And that obviously lends itself a lot to certain CDR approaches. And also, what I didn't know is they're one of the few countries in Europe that are expected to overachieve the 2030 target because of the overinvestment in renewables. And so they're very much looking to gain from a future where carbon is priced. And so, yeah, Spain, huge potential. Unfortunately, not a lot of movement. Again, small ecosystem, little knowledge. It's still very early days. I really hope that changes. There's a very climate friendly government, which is rare these days.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, if you're listening and you're from Spain, start advocating because it
We
might
should
just
do.
work.
We were going to have a premiere in Madrid and Barcelona of Legion 44, and I think probably it would well serve everyone. Maybe we should work on something for the fall. Um, just putting it out there because I
Yeah.
think it definitely moves the needle. Number 6, the future is female. There was a 50-person list
I
created.
mean, it was International Women's Day in March.
Yeah.
The year before, I led a 10, to which then people commented with around 200 names of other women I should have mentioned, rightly so. And this year, I decided to make it 50 across 5 categories, which was a lot of fun. And I essentially looked at, CEOs. I looked at women in science, women in government, and I put together a nice list that hopefully people can use. Because one thing that I keep seeing still in the sector is panels with only men, including many, many panels that I get invited to which I always send them to these lists where I'm like, look, there's all these great women. Just pick one of them, pick 2 of them. Like, you don't need to only have men on a panel about CDR. And so, yeah, took the opportunity of this day to kind of create a resource that people can hopefully just use in future. Because they're way more than 50.
Yeah, when I did my first film, it was mostly men talking about climate. So I got a lot of flack for that, but they were the most, visible at the time back in the early, like 1999. So,
Well,
Nor
gladly
number
we're not there anymore.
number 7, Norway inherit for the win. What happened there? Looking at
The
your
first bio-CCS ton was removed in Europe successfully, which is very
Yay.
exciting. In Norway, by Inherit, and they essentially took CO2 from a biogas plant. They then transported it via truck to Northern Lights, which is one of the first active geological reservoirs, and where it was durably stored. It's very exciting. It's the first. This pathway is one of the ones that has the most potential in Europe. We have a lot of biogas plants. We're literally talking dozens and dozens of megatons per year that are currently just going into the atmosphere. And all of that could be sequestered, and you tend to deal with very pure CO2 already. So it's pretty practical. It's pretty low cost. You can retrofit existing plants. And so congrats to Inherit, and very excited that they showed that it can be done already.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, in the biochar effect, we have a Sky Clean. That's a
Yeah.
biogas to biochar, which is pretty big too. I think probably not as big
Where are
as
they
this one,
based?
but they are in the north of Denmark, and I would have to ask Matthew exact town, but in the
Yeah.
north.
Cool.
Yeah, it's really. I think it's 40,000 tons. I don't know. Does that sound right? I'm going to
Could be
edit
for
this out.
biochar
I don't
project.
actually.
Big biochar project.
Yeah, it's the biggest one I think in Europe. They are saying. So I would anyway. It's in the movie. You'll see it. It's very good. From the founder of Big Window Energy, Stiesdal. So it's a really
Yeah, I know
interesting
them.
conversation.
Know them well.
Yeah. Number 8, drawing the. Sorry, because I have it. Normally I have it on my screen, but I decided to go old school and print it out again. Number 8, drawing down the power of AI for CDR. Yeah, that's really interesting. What AI is doing to energy.
So one of the CDR gurus, Dirk Pessler, he's a former tech entrepreneur who's gone very deep on enhanced weathering, philanthropy, investing. But he has also put together, I would say, the first CDR agent as a public good. And he's unleashing this captain, as he calls him, onto the sector and creating a lot of assets that are really, really useful, whether it's a searchable, easy to use database of all research that has been published on CDR or of all companies. It has its own social media feed, and it's getting more and more popular. It's actually pretty interesting. And I know he has a lot more planned. So yeah, it's a great example of how agentic AI could be used in positive ways, including in our sector. So yeah, if people haven't checked it out, I really recommend it.
Yeah. Yeah, I was following his discussion about how he's deploying agents to do all sorts of stuff. And I'm excited about it because I need to do that for what we do too. I don't quite know how yet, but I find it fascinating. Number 9, all frontiers all at once.
Frontier, yeah, the second biggest buyer in the world, and probably the one that's funded most companies number wise, is has its innovation program open for 2026, where essentially they are funding all sorts of different efforts. One thing that is new this year is they're also funding research. So if people are working on or have ideas on how to solve some of the big questions that are remaining in the scientific community in carbon removal, of which there are many, Frontier is now also looking to fund that, which I think is super exciting. We recorded also a podcast with Hannah Babington, who kind of runs the show there, and she explained both the program, but also how they're thinking about policy increasingly. And yeah, grateful for the work they do. And obviously, if you're an early stage CDR company or academic, you should check out the current call for proposals.
And yeah, well, at the end, we'll talk about it. Number 10, the myth of CCS failure.
This was super interesting.
Yeah.
This is not CDR, but still, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Jack and Kavanaugh, who, is, I think, one of the great thinkers in our space. He does a lot of work on CCS, and there's this myth that kind of CCS doesn't work, that CCS has failed. And he takes the 3 most commonly cited big projects that failed, include, for example, in Australia, there's a very famous project, and he basically goes through each of them and details thoroughly why they failed. And basically, in each case, he shows that it wasn't the CCS technology that failed. It was project management. It was funding. It was the pressure in the geological reservoir. It wasn't the CCS. But, a project failed. It was a CCS project, and people concluded CCS doesn't work. See, here's the project that failed. I didn't have this information, so I thought it was really, really interesting. I also didn't know that humanity has already stored almost 400 megatons of CO2 underground. That was a number that really blew my mind, because I knew that we've been doing it for a while, and I knew that it had been done also in larger scales, but I didn't realize we'd done almost half a gigaton. And that's a lot of CO2 stored. So there's a lot of experience doing this.
There is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I for what didn't make Legion 44 was Carbfix, and Carbfix in Iceland, and they have something on their aluminum smelter, capturing and sequestering CO2. And I think there are a lot of projects that just fly under the radar, or just what people are doing. So maybe it's doesn't have an industry, maybe the way the CDR has. So I think that's interesting. We didn't talk about Microsoft. I saw that you've been clapping back on LinkedIn on some people's assumptions about that.
I mean, honestly, go
I
for
think
it.
it's interesting. No, I'm just saying, like, Frontier. I was like, okay, it's Frontier's moment. I'm like, well, probably. I think it's all assumption. I watched that go down, and I thought, well, that's a case for utilization and stronger business models. Right, while you're figuring out sequestration and just these deals based on moral imperative or compliance, right? Anyway, what do you think? I don't think they've stopped, right? They just paused or reframing.
Honestly, for me, time will tell. My theory, based on all the information I have and haven't spoken to many people, is that there's no news at all. That this is a company that's bought what they needed to buy, that has very little left to buy, that they have another 4 years, and they're just like, okay, let's wait for a few deliveries, and then we'll spend the little remaining budget we have to 2030. Like, for me, this is complete non-news.
Right.
Got blown into, I don't know what type of proportion,
it was crazy.
with really bad consequences. And
Yeah.
I mean, the one thing I will say is that if my theory were right, I would be a bit surprised by the communication from Microsoft not being clearer in response to these early rumors, right? And again, it's a big
Mm-hmm.
company, right? It's not easy to react quickly to, like, you get a heat map reporter and you can't immediately have the perfect statement lined up. I get that. But I
Mm-hmm.
think the lack of just a clear statement early on that could have nipped it completely in the bud, right? And instead, you
Mm.
got these statements which were clearer more and more, but they always left this little room of interpretation that people could build the next huge story into.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, it's completely non-news.
Well, it's
And
also
nobody working in the
exposes.
sector was surprised, right? Like, it's like, yeah, sure, they've
No.
already done 90% of what they said they were going to do, so fine.
Right. I always thought they were removing, their legacy emissions and then that was it. I was thinking it also exposes the emotional reliance everyone had on Microsoft, right? Because um they weren't if someone has 90% of a market, obviously that's not sustainable.
That's the other thing I
So,
quickly want to intervene, just because I've
right,
seen
it's
that
like,
number. That's a false number that was used in the heat map
okay,
article and was quoted over and
a
over again
million
after in
times.
all LinkedIn posts.
Right.
It's 79% for durable room. Again, I love my data. It's 79%
Which
for
still
durable
a lot.
removals, but not
Yes,
90. And it's way
that's true.
less than that if you include nature-based removals. I can't tell you the exact number
Mm-hmm.
because the numbers are
Mm-hmm.
more shaky, but probably 50, 60%. That 90% number was from one quarterly report. So one quarter they had
Oh
90%, and
wow.
the heat
Yeah, yeah,
map
yeah,
used
yeah.
that, and now it's like 90% of the market is market. It's not. It's somewhere between
Mm-hmm.
50 and 79, which is a lot,
Right.
but it's not 90. So that's,
It's
sorry.
not
Yeah,
90.
I've just heard
Well,
it
no, I
over and
mean,
over
look,
again.
that's fair. I mean, it's one of those things. That's why we have these conversations to get into the weeds on all of this stuff. I just think that it's a good example of just an early market. I'll never forget, and this is a very bad comparison, but when video games were first invented, but after like you had the Pong, and Myst came out. This dates me heavily, but it came out on CDs, and everyone was playing Myst, and Myst had 90% of the video game market at the time, you know, but that was temporary. It then, of course, flourished into what it is today. So, everyone just calm down and build better business models, and it'll be fine. That's all I'm gonna say.
I would agree with that.
So,
And
right.
next month, we shall definitely talk with more information about this topic.
Yes, we will, and we will talk earlier in the month. So there you go. Okay, good to see you.
Thanks, Leila.